I think it was considerably different. I think one of the biggest changes is that in shot production, and that with a traditional visual effects film, one of the biggest changes is often you'll start with plates, usually photographed plates, and often, not always, but as often as not, your job on those plates is either to make changes to them in 2D via, compositing or doing sky replacements or those type of element changes into it, so you're augmenting something that's already been photographed, or you're putting something into a plate, and that could be a monster, it could be a building replacement, it could be anything else. But you are ultimately providing an addition or a change or a modification to an element that somebody has already given you. And that's why a lot of work also traditionally in visual effects, there's a lot more compositing work inside there, because a lot of the work has been done to those sort of plates. And also, if you're putting, if you're lighting, a monster into a, streets of San Francisco at night or something, you're having to really deconstruct perhaps the lighting and the look of that plate as it was photographed. So you might treat it very differently in that, it might make more sense for you to say, well, why don't we try and break out a lot of our light sources into separate passes, and we will do a lot more of that whole lighting and colour work inside compositing. With our work on Tintin, we did pretty much all that work in 3D, because if we were putting Tintin inside a room, for instance, we were going to light and we were going to render all of that all together. So the same light that's hitting him is also affecting the wall behind him. It's casting shadows everywhere, and that light that then's bouncing is off that wall behind him, is bouncing back onto him, etc., etc. So it's much more of an integrated thing. So we would try to get a lot more of our look, to get most of the way there inside the 3D renders first of all, and then use compositing to really augment those images. And by that I mean, we'd then layer an atmosphere, or we'd layer in opticals, be they lens flares or flares of light off tables or really bright surfaces, or any of that sort of thing. So it's a really different way for us to work and to think when going from a traditional visual effects film to a film like Tintin. I don't know that it was any really sort of easier or more difficult. I think it was very different. In that, once again, I think if you're doing a visual effects film, in some ways, for the final images, you're much more reliant on often on your compositing department, and so a department like compositing might play a much bigger role in that coming through. With a 3D film, perhaps your emphasis shifts much more strongly onto your lighting department, because they're going to play a much bigger role inside it. So you do have differences in terms of, I guess, staff allocation, where you've got to, allocate your resources and how you might want to spread yourself out. But I don't know that I would consider it any more difficult or easier. So I probably consider every movie that I work on has been difficult in its own right, and everyone always seems more difficult than the one before, but the truth is I think they're different, and you find different challenges in each one. I think part of the problem is, and one of the things with me is, I think with Tintin as well, I don't consider Tintin to be a photorealistic film. I consider it to be a very photographic film, and I think there's a difference between the two, in that if you look at anything in Tintin, from the characters through to the environment, they're all slightly caricatured still and stylized. They're not really real. They all have that certain stylization to them. But I think one of the interesting things with why you would do this as an animated film as opposed to a live action film, I think there's two problems that you face with doing it as a live action film. The first, most obvious one, is the characters. If you do it as a live action film, it's always going to be a guy in a mask with maybe prosthetic noses and wigs and things like that. And that may or may not be successful. Certainly you are going to have to find actors that look like perhaps the characters that you're trying to portray. You're going to be fairly constrained there, and even then you're always going to, I guess, tread that very fine line with, is it going to look like a man in a mask? So there's the characters problem. But I actually think a bigger problem is the environments. It's like, okay, so if we want to put Tintin in Labrador Street outside his apartment, or if we want to put him in Bigar, or we want to put him out on a ship out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or anything like that, are those sets that we're going to have to build? it's like the construction job and the sets required would be just huge. Like, Tintin's world is big, it's a big place, and for you to have to attempt to build that, the chances are you're going to end up doing most of it in CG anyway, because physically and economically it just wouldn't make sense to have to build it. I think absolutely. I think we were aware of it every moment of every day with what we did with the film. The fact that, you know, we know that there's been motion capture films that haven't been so successful, that people just don't react to terribly well for one reason or another. I think the trap that we fall into is that we sort of say, well, there's a fault with the technology to do that. At the end of the day, motion capture is just a tool, and it's kind of, you know, depends on how you want to use that tool. We talk about things like in Tintin, the fact that we animated Snowy throughout the show, but you know what, we motion captured a lot of reference from a dog so that we could study his motion. We have things like, you know, you can use it as a tool, and just, I'll get to the hero characters in a minute, but also for all the background characters, it's like, you know what, you could hand animate 70 people walking around inside a marketplace in North Africa, or you could spend a day on a set with an animation director who will guide those people through a whole heap of performances, saying, hey, I want you to be the guy selling this, I want you to be the person doing this, I want you to be the thing doing this. You can capture that, and for us it's an awful lot more efficient to do. With our hero characters, you know, we use motion capture because Stephen and Peter, they wanted to capture the performance of some great actors as well, you know, to really utilise people like, you know, Jamie Bell and Andy Serkis and you know, Simon Pegg and all these people, Daniel Craig, the incredible performance that these guys could bring to this movie and to bring to these characters. So I know there's a lot of, you know, argument and debate. Hey, is Tintin an animated film? Is it not an animated film? What I can tell you is we had an awful lot of very skilled animators working on Tintin, who were working with, you know, in some cases working with the performance capture data to make maybe changes to it after the fact, in some cases to completely be animating stuff from scratch for things that just weren't captured, maybe during a lot of action sequences and things like that. And of course that's not including all of the, you know, hundreds of non-hero character animations, from birds through to Snowy, through to vehicles, through to everything else that is animated and is moving across the film. I also want to just add as well that, you know, we use animation as a fairly, I think we think about it as a fairly narrow band, but, you know, what do you call clothing simulation that happens across it? That's all animating. Flags that are across there, we're not really doing that any differently than perhaps happening in an animated film. Effects animation, smoke, fire, water, all that type of, you know, sparks, all the other traditional forms of animation that are there inside the films, we have animators working on that. So I feel comfortable, me personally, I would feel comfortable saying that yes, I think Tintin is an animated film. I think one of the tools that's used in that animated film is performance and motion capture, in the same way as, who knows, maybe years ago in Walt Disney films they would have drawn actors, they would have, you know, filmed actors doing certain poses or performing certain action and animated basically over the top of it. I see what, once again, I think I would go back to Avatar, certainly what we learned on Avatar. We did do motion capture on Planet of the Apes, but it was quite a different sort of beast. It was, they were doing a lot of sort of on-set motion capture, which was just a really different problem in its own right that they were trying to solve. Tintin was much more similar to Avatar in that it was captured inside a confined space, inside a studio. Really, I think it was the work that was done on Avatar, with, you know, using actors to give a performance, and the facial tracking systems that were developed, you know, in terms of being able to then translate that through to real-time rigs and to map that through to muscles and to, you know, everything that drives our faces, that just really helped us through with Tintin.